There's a two-word phrase Jesus repeats in the exact same grammatical form 7 separate times in a single gospel. At an 8th time, stripped of the image that usually follows it, in a scene tense enough that soldiers sent to arrest him fall backward onto the ground the moment he says it. I am, eimi in the Greek. Ordinary words, the most basic linking verb in the language, the kind of construction you'd use to say, I am tired, or I am late. Nothing about the grammar itself is unusual. What's unusual is what happens when you notice this exact phrase already has a history before Jesus ever uses it. A history that shows up centuries earlier in a burning bush in the mouth of God Himself. Most readers move through John's Gospel, treating each I am statement as its own self-contained metaphor. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door. Each one gets read, correctly, as a rich image worth sitting with on its own. What almost nobody stops to count is how many times the pattern repeats in the identical grammatical shape across one book, and what happens in the one scene where Jesus drops the image entirely and says the two words alone, unattached to any metaphor at all, in front of a crowd of people who had just quoted Abraham at him.
By the end of this video, you'll have all 8 instances laid out together, in order, the way John himself seems to want them read, not as 8 separate poetic flourishes, but as one repeated formula, building toward a single moment where the formula stops borrowing an image and simply states, plainly, whose name it was borrowing all along. Most sermons on the I am statements treat them as a greatest hits list of comforting metaphors, 7 beautiful pictures of who Jesus is, preached individually, 1 per Sunday, each complete in itself. Bread for your hunger, light for your darkness, a door for your safety, a shepherd for your wandering, a resurrection for your grief, a way for your confusion, a vine for your fruitfulness. All true, all worth preaching, and all almost entirely disconnected in how they usually get taught, from the specific grammatical choice sitting underneath every single one of them.
That disconnection isn't really anyone's fault. English I am is about as plain as language gets. There's no way for an English sentence to signal on its own that this particular I am is doing something different from every other I am in the Bible. The flattening happens automatically the moment the Greek crosses into English, the same way verily, verily flattens into background noise, or many mansions quietly drops its connection to abide. Here's what gets lost in that flattening. Exodus 3:14 records God's answer when Moses asked what name he should give the Israelites when they asked who sent him. I am that I am. Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you. When the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek roughly 2 centuries before Jesus' birth, the translation nearly every Greek-speaking Jew of Jesus' own time would have read and quoted, that phrase became ego eimi, ho on, I am the being one, or more simply, ego eimi, the exact 2 words, not a rare phrase Jesus happened to reach for, the specific formula the God of Israel used to name himself centuries before to a man standing in front of a burning bush.
Once you know that I am the bread of life stops reading as only a beautiful image and starts reading as something with a second layer running underneath it, a claim being made twice at once in the metaphor and once in the grammar carrying it. There's also a structural detail worth noticing before the catalog itself begins. John's Gospel is famously organized in its first half around a carefully limited set of miracle accounts scholars usually call the signs: water into wine, healing an official's son, a paralyzed man at a pool, feeding a multitude, walking on water, healing a man born blind, raising Lazarus. 7 of them, deliberately curated out of what John himself says near the very end of the book, was a much larger and unrecorded total. Many other signs truly did Jesus, which are not written in this book. John is a writer who counts and who expects an attentive reader to notice when he's counting. 7 signs, 7 I am statements bearing an image, running through the same book. The kind of doubled structure that looks far more like deliberate architecture than coincidence once both sets are placed side by side.
Here's the two-part key the text actually hands you once you stop reading each I am statement in isolation and start tracking the whole set as one repeated pattern. The first part is the number itself. John's Gospel records 7 distinct I am statements with a predicate attached. 7 times Jesus says I am, followed by a concrete image: bread of life, light of the world, the door, the good shepherd, the resurrection and the life, the way, the truth and the life, the true vine. 7 is not incidental in John's Gospel. The same Gospel structures its miracle accounts around 7 carefully chosen signs, and 7 statements built on the identical divine name formula, each one attached to something ordinary and physical, forms a deliberate, countable set, rather than 7 unrelated sayings that happen to share a verb.
The second part is what happens once when the pattern drops its image entirely. John 8:58 records Jesus saying to a hostile crowd who had just invoked their descent from Abraham as their credential, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am." No predicate, no metaphor, just the bare formula, eimi, standing completely alone, grammatically identical to the Septuagint's rendering of God's own self-naming in Exodus 3, and deployed in a sentence that claims existence prior to Abraham using present tense rather than past. Not I was, I am. The crowd's response is recorded immediately afterward. They pick up stones. Put the 2 parts together, and the 7 metaphor-bearing statements stop looking like isolated comfort images and start looking like 7 controlled, gradually escalating uses of a formula that, on the 8th use, sheds its metaphor and states its source directly. If the fact that I am the bread of life and I am that I am share the identical Greek grammar is new to you, that's exactly the kind of thing this channel exists to dig up. A like helps more people find it. Here's the full set, in the order John places them. John 6:35, repeated again in verses 48 and 51. I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger. Spoken the day after Jesus fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves. The image isn't abstract. It follows a meal the crowd had just eaten, redirecting their hunger for more bread towards something the miracle itself was pointing at. John 8:12, echoed again in 9:5. I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. Spoken according to John 8:20 in the temple treasury, likely near the great menorah lit during the Feast of Tabernacles, when the temple courts were flooded with lamplight each evening as part of the festival itself. The image again isn't floating free of its setting. It's spoken directly in front of the light it's claiming to surpass. John 10:7 and 9. I am the door of the sheep. I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved. A shepherding image, drawn from the practice of a shepherd sleeping across the entrance of a sheepfold at night, physically becoming the only way in or out. The entrance isn't decorative, it's the shepherd's own body positioned as the single point of access. John 10:11 and 14 in the same discourse. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. The image shifts from the entrance to the one who guards what's inside it, and adds a claim none of the previous 3 had made explicitly, that this particular shepherd's defining act is laying down his own life. John 11:25, spoken to Martha outside Lazarus' tomb, 4 days after his death. I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. Unlike the first 4, This one isn't illustrated by an ordinary object at all. Bread, light, a door, a shepherd are all things anyone could point to. Resurrection is not a thing anyone has ever pointed to. The statement claims to be the category itself, spoken at the one moment in the gospel where the claim is about to be tested in front of witnesses.
John 14:6, spoken to his disciples the night before his death. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. 3 predicate nouns joined to a single I am, the only statement in the set stacking multiple images into one sentence rather than offering a single picture, as if by this point in the gospel, no single ordinary image is sufficient on its own anymore. John 15:1 and 5, opening the final extended discourse before his arrest. I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. I am the vine, ye are the branches. The 7th and final image-bearing statement, and the only one that explicitly folds the hearer into the metaphor's own structure, not simply told what Jesus is, but told they are branches attached to it, the same relational abide language this channel has already traced elsewhere in this gospel. 7 statements, 7 ordinary or near-ordinary images, food, light, and entrance, a guardian, a category of life itself, a path, a living plant, each one carrying the identical 2-word grammatical formula underneath it, spoken across a single continuous narrative from a crowd freshly fed bread to a small group of disciples about to watch him die.
The pattern reaches its sharpest point not in any of the 7, but in the moment the formula appears with nothing attached to it at all. John 8:58 sits at the end of an escalating argument. The crowd has just invoked Abraham as their spiritual credential. We be Abraham's seed. Abraham is our father. Jesus' response strips the I am formula down to its bare grammatical minimum for the only time in the gospel. Before Abraham was, I am. Grammatically, the sentence is strange on purpose. Before Abraham was uses ordinary past tense language for something that happened, while I am stays locked in the present tense, refusing to become I was, even though the sentence's own logic would call for it. The tense mismatch isn't a slip. It's the same move Exodus 3:14 makes when God refuses to give Moses a name rooted in past or future, only in an unbroken, timeless present. The crowd's reaction confirms exactly how the sentence was heard. John 8:59 records it immediately. Then took they up stones to cast at him, the standard first-century response to blasphemy, specifically to a claim of divine identity. Nobody in that courtyard needed the phrase explained to them. They understood the grammar instantly, in a way 21 centuries of English translation has made much harder for modern readers to catch without deliberately tracing it back. One more scene deserves mention here. Later in the same gospel, doing quietly with action what chapter 8 does with argument. John 18:4-6 describes the arresting party coming for Jesus in Gethsemane. He asks who they're seeking. They answer, Jesus of Nazareth. He answers simply, I am he. In the Greek, once again, bare ego eimi, no predicate, and the text records an odd, almost cinematic detail. As soon as then as he had said unto them, I am he, they went backward and fell to the ground. The same 2 words that provoked stones in chapter 8 provoke an entire armed detachment to stumble backward in chapter 18, as if the formula itself carries a kind of force independent of whatever image happens to be riding on it that day. Here's what this means for anyone who has heard the I am statements 100 times as 7 separate comfort verses without ever being shown their one repeated claim. It changes what it means to sit with any single one of them. I am the bread of life isn't only offering nourishment, it's making the same 2-word claim Exodus 3 makes, now specifically attached to hunger, as if to say whatever it was that spoke from the burning bush is now speaking from inside an ordinary need you have today. The same holds for light, for a door, for a shepherd, for resurrection, for a way, for a vine. 7 different entry points into human need, each one carrying the identical borrowed weight. This channel has already sat with John 8:58's own I am once before, from a different angle entirely. That verse showed up as one of several examples in a video about the Greek word amen, because Jesus prefaces this exact claim with the doubled verily, verily formula. This channel traced back to its own strange grammatical history. If you haven't seen how that word works, the two videos sit closer together than they first appear. The same verse doing double duty as an example in one word study and the centerpiece of this one. If there's someone in your life who's only ever heard these 7 verses preached as disconnected greeting card comfort, bread for your hunger on one Sunday, light for your darkness on another, this is worth sending them as a single piece, not 7, because the weight of the claim only really lands once all 8 instances sit next to each other rather than scattered across separate sermons months apart.
It's worth being fair to a natural objection here, because the grammar alone doesn't settle everything. Eimi is genuinely ordinary Greek. Peter uses it to deny knowing Jesus, I am not, and the blind man Jesus heals uses it to confirm his own identity, I am he, both in perfectly mundane, non-divine senses elsewhere in this same gospel. The formula by itself doesn't automatically mean divinity every single time it appears on a page. What makes the 8 instances in this list different isn't the bare grammar in isolation. It's the grammar combined with context. 7 statements deliberately paired with the register of divine self-description from Exodus, plus 1 absolute predicate-free instance aimed directly at a claim about existing before Abraham, met immediately with stones for blasphemy. Context is doing real work alongside the grammar in every single case on this list, not the 2 words by themselves. Step back and look at the whole shape of it. One Greek phrase, eimi, ordinary grammar on its surface, carrying underneath it the exact formula the Septuagint uses for God's own self-revelation at the burning bush. 7 statements built on that formula, each one attached to something ordinary: bread, light, a door, a shepherd, a category of life itself, a path, a living vine, spoken across a single continuous narrative that moves from a crowd fed with actual bread to a small circle of disciples about to leave him.
1/8 statement, stripped of every image, spoken directly into an argument about ancestry and identity, using a present tense that refuses to resolve into past even when the sentence's own logic calls for it, met immediately with stones. One further echo, later still, in a garden at night. The same bare 2 words spoken to an armed detachment sent to arrest him, and an entire company of soldiers stumbling backward before a hand is laid on him. Picture a single word, spoken quietly in 7 different rooms of the same house: a kitchen over bread, a doorway at dusk, a threshold, a fold of sheep, a graveside, a crossroads, a vineyard at harvest. And then, in the house's own courtyard, the same word spoken once more with no room attached to it at all, just the word itself, standing in the open. That's the picture underneath this pattern. Not 7 separate claims. One claim, said 7 different ways, and then once, said plainly. If you've read John's Gospel and always registered these 7 statements as beautiful but separate, try reading them again as one continuous thread instead. Bread, light, door, shepherd, resurrection, way, vine. And then the bare formula standing alone at the center of an argument about who has the right to claim ancient authority. The 7 images were never simply 7 different metaphors competing for your attention. They're 7 doors into the same claim, made accessible through 7 different kinds of ordinary human need, so that whichever one you're standing in front of today, the formula underneath it is the same one. If this is a day you're standing in front of the hunger one, or the darkness one, or the grief one, that's worth noticing rather than rushing past. The claim being made in that specific image is the identical claim being made in all 7 and in the bare version besides. If this changed how you read these 7 verses, tell us in the comments which one you find yourself standing in front of most often right now. That's worth actually talking through together rather than keeping to yourself. And if this is the kind of pattern you'd never noticed before, a like helps more people run into it the way you just did. Subscribe. This channel exists for exactly this kind of thing. The sentence repeated 7 times in plain sight, waiting for someone to count. God bless you.